Welcome to the channel, everyone. Today, we're diving into a story that proves you should never judge a book by its cover or a biker by their patch. Forget the headlines and the stereotypes. Sometimes the real heroes are the ones wearing leather and riding iron horses. This is a true story about a moment of casual cruelty and the swift, unexpected justice delivered by men most people cross the street to avoid. The Bandidos Motorcycle Club. It was a cold, late afternoon in a quiet, upscale suburban town just outside of Austin, Texas. The kind of place where the biggest drama is usually a dispute over a property line or a noisy leaf blower. Our story centers around two vastly different worlds, colliding in the most mundane of settings. A local, trendy coffee shop, known for its artisanal brews and overpriced pastries. In one corner, we have 16-year-old Alex. Alex wasn't from the privileged side of town. He worked a minimum wage job at the coffee shop after school, trying to save up for an old used car and help his single mother with rent. He was a good kid, polite, focused, a little shy, and always hustling. He wore a crisp uniform, a forced smile, and the fatigue of a long day in his eyes. He was the epitome of the working-class teenager just trying to get by. In the other corner stands Mr. Wallace. Wallace was everything Alex was not. Wealthy, entitled, and possessing a profound lack of patience or empathy. He was a man in his late 50s, dressed in a custom-tailored suit that probably cost more than Alex's entire paycheck for 2 months. He drove a luxury imported sedan and spoke with the condescending drawl of someone who believed the world existed solely to cater to his immediate needs. Wallace was a regular and a notorious pain. He demanded perfection, never tipped, and treated the staff less like employees and more like minor inconveniences. On this particular day, the coffee shop was busy. The after-work rush was hitting hard. Alex was behind the counter trying to keep up with a dozen complex orders flying in from the digital kiosks and the walk-up line. Wallace placed his order, a large, extra-hot, complicated espresso drink with specific instructions on the foam consistency and temperature, the kind of order designed to challenge the barista's sanity. Alex, rushing, poured the drink. As he slid it across the counter to Wallace, the paper cup, perhaps slightly overfilled, perhaps not perfectly settled in the coaster, slipped a fraction of an inch. Not a spill, not a massive mess, just a tiny bead of hot liquid that kissed the back of Wallace's impeccably clean hand. It was an accident, a minute imperfection in an otherwise high-pressure transaction. Wallace reacted not with a sigh of minor annoyance, but with explosive, entitled rage. "Are you kidding me?" Wallace's voice cut through the cafe chatter like a knife. The entire room went silent. "Look at this, you incompetent little brat. You've ruined my suit." "This is a $1,000 garment." Alex's face went white. "I am so sorry, sir. I can remake it right away, and I'll get you a towel." "A towel?" Wallace scoffed, his face turning an unhealthy shade of red. He didn't wait for Alex to move. Fueled by his own inflated sense of importance and a tiny inconvenience, Wallace did the unthinkable. He took the extra hot coffee, the one Alex had just prepared for him, and, with deliberate, spiteful motion, hurled the entire contents of the large cup directly into Alex's chest. It wasn't just a toss. It was an act of aggressive humiliation. The hot, dark liquid saturated Alex's thin shirt, instantly burning his skin through the fabric. Alex cried out, stumbling backward, the empty cup clattering to the floor. The pain was immediate, but the emotional shock was worse. He stood there, soaked, scalded, and visibly trembling, tears welling up not just from the pain but from the sheer, unjust brutality of the act. The cafe froze. People gasped. A few customers started murmuring, some reaching for their phones, but no one moved to directly intervene. They were stunned into inaction by the sheer audacity of Wallace's cruelty. Wallace, meanwhile, smoothed his lapel, his breathing heavy with self-righteous anger. He looked down at the boy he had just assaulted, utterly unrepentant. "Maybe that will teach you to pay attention, kid," Wallace sneered, loud enough for everyone to hear. He turned to leave, his arrogance filling the space the sudden silence had created. But Wallace had forgotten one thing. He had forgotten the 4 men sitting quietly at a corner table near the back. Men who had been sipping black coffee, exchanging few words, and simply watching. These men were big, bearded, and their cuts clearly identified them. They were full-patch members of the Bandidos Motorcycle Club. Most people in that café had dismissed them as background noise, as menacing fixtures you tried not to make eye contact with. They looked tough, because they were tough. They looked formidable, because they had earned that reputation on the road and in the streets. They embodied the outlaw image. They were exactly the type of people Wallace and his privileged peers believed were the problem with society. But these men, whose lives often revolved around a code of loyalty, respect, and defending their own, had seen the entire incident. They had watched the boy's diligence, the man's petty entitlement, and the despicable, cowardly attack. Their silence wasn't fear, it was observation. And when Wallace moved to walk past their table, their observation ended. It was time for action. The first to move was a massive man named Hammer, his face a landscape of scars, and his eyes fixed entirely on Wallace. Hammer stood up, his leather vest creaking. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. His sheer presence was a wall that blocked Wallace's exit. Wallace stopped dead, finally looking truly startled. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by men who looked like they regularly ate challenges for breakfast. "Excuse me," Wallace stammered, trying to inject some authority into his voice, which now sounded thin and reedy. Hammer didn't budge. He just pointed a massive tattooed finger back towards the counter where Alex was still standing, cradling his scalded chest, trying desperately not to break down in front of the crowd. The silent confrontation held the whole café hostage. The Bandidos had watched. Now everyone was about to see what happens when true justice is served outside the confines of the court system. This wasn't about the coffee. It was about power, respect, and the defense of the defenseless. It was about an immediate, uncompromising response to an act of a bully. Hammer's partner, Ghost, who had been sitting calmly, now stood up slowly, reaching into his pocket. The air grew thick with tension. Wallace started to sweat. He had messed with the wrong people, and the game was about to change. The Bandidos MC wasn't going to let this injustice stand. This wasn't their fight, but a fundamental lack of respect, especially directed at a working kid, was something their code simply could not abide. They were the bad guys, sure, but they had their own set of rules, and a rich bully hurting a kid violated every single one of them. The reckoning was coming, and it was going to be loud. Wallace, pale and shaking, tried to step around Hammer, but the biker moved with surprising speed for a man his size, effectively sealing the exit. The tailored suit, the expensive watch, the arrogant posture, all of it suddenly looked flimsy and meaningless against the sheer imposing presence of the four Bandidos. "Look, I don't know who you people are," Wallace stammered, his voice rising in panic, "but I'm leaving. This is none of your business." A third Bandido, Bull, a man whose face was mostly hidden beneath a thick beard and dark sunglasses, slowly pushed his chair back. The scrape of the metal legs on the tile floor sounded deafening in the silence. He didn't threaten or yell. Instead, he spoke with a low, gravelly voice that carried a chilling, undeniable authority. "It became our business the second you put your hands on that kid," Bull stated simply. "In our world, you don't disrespect the innocent. You sure as hell don't burn a child trying to earn a paycheck." Wallace instantly switched tactics, trying to appeal to their presumed self-interest. "I'll pay. I'll give the boy $100. 500. Just let me walk out of here and forget this whole thing ever happened. You don't want trouble with the police, do you?" Ghost, the Bandido who had stood up second, finally spoke, his lips curving into a slow, mirthless smile. "We were watching the whole thing, Wallace. No one called the police when you assaulted him. We're going to give the police a minute or two of grace before we involve them. It's called community service." He pulled a pristine, folded $50 bill from his wallet and tossed it onto the table near Wallace. "That's your tip for the show." Then Hammer moved, not aggressively, but deliberately. He reached out and gently took Alex by the shoulder, leading him away from the counter and toward Wallace. "Show him, kid," Hammer instructed, his voice surprisingly gentle. "Show him what he did." Alex, still nursing his burns and overwhelmed by the attention, hesitated. But the solidarity radiating from the bikers gave him a small surge of courage. He peeled the wet, scalding fabric of his shirt away from his skin, just enough to reveal the reddened, blistering area beneath. It was clearly a first-degree burn, maybe worse, covering a significant patch of his chest. The sight seemed to shock the remaining customers into action, and the murmurs turned into angry calls. Wallace, realizing the situation had fully escalated beyond his control, tried to make a break for the door again. That's when the Bandidos' true intervention began. It wasn't a brutal, cinematic beatdown. It was a precise, calculated act of humiliation and justice that perfectly fit the crime. Hammer grabbed Wallace's arm, not letting him pass. Bull moved to the counter, where another large cup of coffee, freshly brewed, jet black and steaming hot, was waiting. Bull picked it up. The fourth Bandido, known as Ice, moved to stand directly behind Wallace, ensuring there was absolutely no escape. "You threw hot coffee on a kid for an honest mistake," Bull stated, walking slowly toward Wallace. "That was your mistake. Now you get the consequence." Wallace started pleading. "Wait, please. I'll call my lawyer. I'll pay for the medical bills." Bull ignored him. In one swift, powerful motion, Bull dumped the entire cup of scalding coffee, exactly as Wallace had done to Alex, directly down the front of Wallace's expensive suit jacket. The liquid immediately saturated the fine wool, soaking his shirt and tie, and making him yelp in surprise and pain. It wasn't enough to cause serious burns due to the thickness of his clothing, but it was enough to sting, to soak him completely, and most importantly, to ruin his clothing and his dignity. The smell of expensive coffee and entitlement mixed with the sudden, sharp, pathetic cry of the wealthy man. The Bandidos didn't laugh. They just watched. Wallace, sputtering and humiliated, scrambled away from the bikers, his $1,000 suit now dripping with coffee, his arrogance dissolved into pathetic rage and fear. He ran out the door and sprinted toward his luxury sedan, peeling away from the curb in a frenzy, leaving a trail of steam and shame behind him. Bull turned back to Alex, who was staring in wide-eyed disbelief. "Get that taken care of, kid," Bull said, his eyes softening slightly. "Go to the emergency room. We'll wait here and deal with the cops if they show up." Ghost stepped forward and pressed a wad of cash, not $500, but nearly $1,000, pooled from the members' pockets, into Alex's hand. "For the doctor, and maybe a new bike to replace that used car you're saving for," Ghost said. "No one messes with the workers. Get out of here and don't look back." As Alex stood there, speechless, clutching the money, the customers in the cafe finally broke their silence, not with fear, but with applause. They weren't clapping for the law or for order. They were clapping for an act of pure, uncompromising justice delivered by men the world had labeled as villains. A few minutes later, the police arrived. The Bandidos were calm, collected, and articulate. They explained they had witnessed an assault, battery with a caustic substance, and had detained the assailant until he fled. They did not mention the reciprocal coffee toss. The cafe manager, who had also witnessed Wallace's cruelty countless times, backed up the Bandidos' story, focusing only on Wallace's brutal act against the teen. The Bandidos walked out without an arrest, leaving the cafe manager to promise Alex a paid few days off and a full accounting of Wallace's identity for a potential civil suit. They rode off into the sunset on their loud, powerful machines, the sound of their engines drowning out the faint sound of sirens in the distance. They were outlaws, yes, but they were also men with a code, protecting the weak, punishing the cruel, and always standing up for those who can't stand up for themselves. The rich man learned an expensive, painful lesson that day. Sometimes the bad guys are the only ones willing to be the good guys, and when the Bandidos MC is watching, you'd better watch your back. Thanks for watching. If you want more stories of justice delivered by the unexpected heroes of the road, hit that like button and subscribe.